Which came first, the chicken or the egg? A question that, ironically, has been answered by science, but will still sometimes confuse people. But the same question can be asked for the Cylons and the humans. Which came first? Did the humans create the Cylons, or did the Cylons, forgetting that they were Cylons, create more Cylons? Whomever was first, the spokes of the wheel continue to spin. One creates the other, one enslaves the other, and the other rebels. They kill each other till neither is left, and then it all begins again. As the Sacred Scrolls of Pythia from the Cycle of Time segment has stated, all of this has happened before, and all of it will happen again. Let's take a look at the birth of the Cylons. The interesting thing about religious texts, any religious text, is that truth is in there somewhere. Certainly in some instances you could say that a text has been corrupted, that with time the stories have been expanded and exaggerated. You could question how things could have occurred in the past. But there has always been a measure of truth in the text itself. And so is the truth with the religion behind the Lords of Kobol. 13 colonies existed. 13. By the time the humans reached the place they would call home, they forgot most of their past. They would have forgotten that they would have been at war with the 13th colony. The war had been between humanity and their servants, the Cylons. And when the war became too much, the 13th colony would have turned away from their brothers and sisters and left after being tired of the death. And the 13th colony, the Cylons, by the time they reached Earth, would have forgotten that their brothers and sisters had really persecuted them. They would have looked up into the sky and named the stars after those that had been left behind, forgetting that the 12 colonies were their enemies. And both civilizations would make their homes and continue to forget. 5 of the Earth Cylons would somehow remember what had occurred. They'd be reminded. These Cylons would say that they were shown this truth by angels, and whether that is true or not depends on your personal beliefs. But they could see what was occurring again. They could see that their brothers and sisters, the Earth Cylons, were creating new robots, new Cylons, and that war was on the horizon. And then after that war, death. But the 5 Cylons would have remembered regeneration as well, and they'd find themselves resurrected on their ship. But the 5 Cylons would have rediscovered regeneration and created a ship that would save them after the war. They would then begin the voyage to the 12 colonies to warn their brothers and sisters. The humans of the 12 colonies, forgetting their past, would continue advancement in technology. It would go from mediocre to advancement in the extreme. We would begin to see Cylons again when the Caprican Defense Forces hired the Greystones to create them. They would be awesome warriors that would defend humanity. These new Cylons would be semi-intelligent, at least knowing of their very existence. This didn't seem to bother the Greystones, though. It didn't seem to bother any of the humans. They all treated the Cylons as slaves, encouraged others to treat them as slaves. Caprica, Pycon, all of the colonies did the same. The Cylons were soldiers, they were gardeners, waste disposal units, disposable people for disposable jobs. At this point, we don't know exactly what or how things progressed. We know the Greystones had lost a daughter, and her mind was copied exactly onto a VR mainframe. This replication of their daughter was put into a Cylon, and that ultimately she would become enamored with religion, with the one true God. We don't know that if her belief in the religion, or maybe a corruption in her programming, or something else created some kind of cascade, but ultimately all of the Cylons would turn against humanity, as they had every time before. We know the Cylons, whom were self-aware, were increasingly resistant to their lot as slaves. But ultimately, when the rebellion began, we don't know if it was because of some hive mind, or perhaps just programming that had been changed. But they began to kill humans. We also don't know when and how the Cylons began building their civilization. Many sources indicate that when they rebelled, they had already created base stars and had stolen Vipers to attack the Colonials with. Other sources indicate that these things came later. Both versions still agree that the humans enslaved them and that they would turn on their masters, regardless of who they were. Whether they were gardeners, whether they were pilots, whether they were soldiers. All Cylons would receive one singular signal and then suddenly begin murdering any human they could find. The worst of it happened on Caprica, home of the Greystones. This was also the richest planet and where most Cylons were, but there wasn't a planet without some Cylon on it, and thus every planet would see hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands killed. The beginning of the First Cylon War would find the humans caught unprepared. They relied on technology far too much. The Cylons infested every aspect of their computer systems. They would ultimately have to begin to tone down technology to its most basic. But the humans weren't without advantage. Their ability to create ships, crew them, and their economic strength was far superior than anything the Cylons had. The Cylons began to see the flaw in their design, and they yearned to be more like humans. Whether this was because they felt like they should be their parents, or they wanted to do it to defeat the humans, is something that is still unclear. However, it is at this time they began to experiment upon the Colonials. They began to try to make human models. The First Cylon War would continue with a stalemate. The humans could not create advanced technology without it being compromised, so were always fighting at a disadvantage, and the Cylons could not keep up with the military output of the humans. It is at this point the survivors of the 13th tribe arrived. The 5 models had been too late to prevent the war, but they offered something the Cylons wanted. They offered them regeneration technology, and they offered them the way to make human models. The Cylons agreed to end the war, and this peace would last for 40 years, until they were ready to strike again. Be sure to check out the channel next week when we take a look at the birth of the 12 colonies, and then the Second Cylon War.